The evening shift at the Grand Plaza Hotel was usually quiet, but not today. The lobby buzzed with activity as guests streamed in and out through the revolving glass doors, their expensive luggage rolling across the polished marble floors. Behind the front desk, a young receptionist stood tall and proud, her uniform perfectly pressed, her name tag glinting under the crystal chandeliers. She had worked hard to get this position at one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Growing up in a small town, she'd always dreamed of being part of the glamorous hospitality world. Now, after 3 years of dedicated service, she had earned a reputation for maintaining the hotel's high standards. Her supervisors often praised her attention to detail and her ability to handle difficult situations with grace. The clock had just struck 7, marking the busiest hour of check-ins. A group of businessmen in expensive suits waited patiently in line while she processed their reservations with swift efficiency. The lobby piano played softly in the background, and the sweet scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Everything was running smoothly, just as she liked it. That's when she noticed her. A woman in her mid-40s had just walked through the entrance, but something seemed off. Unlike the other guests, she wore a wrinkled brown jacket and carried a worn-out backpack. Her hair was messy, as if she'd been walking in the wind, and her shoes were scuffed and dusty. She looked more like someone who had wandered in from the street than a guest of the Grand Plaza. The receptionist felt her jaw tighten. She had dealt with similar situations before. People trying to use the lobby bathroom or escape the cold. The hotel had strict policies about maintaining its 5-star image. After all, guests paid top dollar for luxury and exclusivity. She couldn't let someone disturb the peaceful atmosphere she worked so hard to maintain. As the woman approached the front desk, the receptionist noticed other guests giving her strange looks. A couple in designer clothes whispered to each other, their eyes darting between the woman and their surroundings. The businessmen shifted uncomfortably in line. The perfect harmony of the lobby was already starting to crack. Without hesitation, the receptionist stepped out from behind the desk. She had to handle the situation quickly and discreetly. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she intercepted the woman before she could reach the line of waiting guests. She straightened her back, put on her most professional smile, and prepared to do what she thought was best for the hotel. Little did she know, this moment would change not just her career, but her entire perspective on life. The woman standing before her was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget, one that would make her question everything she thought she knew about success, appearance, and true hospitality. In those few seconds before she opened her mouth to speak, the universe held its breath. The piano music seemed to fade away. The chandelier lights dimmed in her vision, and time slowed down. She was about to make a decision that would ripple through her life in ways she couldn't imagine. Sometimes the biggest mistakes happen on the most ordinary days when we're too sure of ourselves to see what's right in front of us. The receptionist cleared her throat and stepped directly into the woman's path. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that customer service workers perfect over years, polite on the surface, but with an unmistakable edge underneath. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to exit the premises. We're fully booked tonight." The woman blinked, clearly taken aback. "But I haven't even asked about a room yet," she said quietly. Her voice was surprisingly gentle, with a hint of an accent the receptionist couldn't quite place. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the revolving doors and sending a few dead leaves skittering across the marble floor behind them. "Trust me, I know our availability," the receptionist responded, her smile never wavering. She gestured toward the door. "There's a budget hotel about 3 blocks down, that might be more." She paused, choosing her words carefully, "suitable for your needs." The woman's expression changed then, not to anger as the receptionist expected, but to something more complex, a mixture of curiosity and disappointment. She reached for her backpack, and the receptionist tensed, ready to signal security. But the woman simply said, "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." That request, so common among difficult customers, made the receptionist's professional mask crack slightly. She'd handled countless complaints before, but something about this woman's calm demeanor made her uncomfortable. Still, she stood her ground. "I am the senior staff member on duty right now," she lied, knowing her supervisor was just in the back office, "and I'm asking you politely to leave." A small crowd had started to gather, trying to look like they weren't watching but failing miserably. The piano player had even slowed his melody, clearly distracted by the scene unfolding near the front desk. The woman seemed to notice none of this, her eyes fixed steadily on the receptionist. "I understand you're doing your job," the woman said, "but you're making assumptions that—" The receptionist cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, if you won't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call security." She reached for the phone, her manicured nails clicking against the receiver. The threat usually worked. Most people would rather walk out than face the embarrassment of being escorted out. But this woman didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started typing something. The receptionist felt a flash of irritation. Was she going to post about this on social media? Call the local news? She dealt with threats before, and they never amounted to anything. "Security, please come to the front desk," she spoke into the phone, her voice echoing slightly in the now hushed lobby. The woman kept typing on her phone, still eerily calm. Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The receptionist felt a surge of relief. Finally, this situation would be resolved. "This woman needs to be escorted out," she told them confidently. "She's disturbing our guests." As the guards approached, the woman finally looked up from her phone. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice carrying a new weight of authority that made everyone, including the security guards, pause. "But I would like all of you to remember this moment very clearly, every detail." Something in her tone made the receptionist's stomach drop. The woman's worn jacket suddenly seemed less like a sign of poverty and more like a deliberate choice. Her messy hair could have been from hours of travel rather than homelessness. The backpack was that of designer logo partially hidden under the dust. But it was too late. The security guards had already taken the woman's arms as gently as possible and were leading her toward the door. The woman didn't resist. She simply walked with them, her head held high, that same unreadable expression on her face. As the revolving door spun one last time, the woman looked back over her shoulder. Their eyes met across the lobby, and in that moment, the receptionist felt a chill run down her spine. She had a sudden, terrible feeling that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of check-ins and routine tasks, but the receptionist couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. Every time the revolving door spun, she expected the woman to return with the police or news reporters. The security guards had resumed their posts, acting like nothing unusual had happened, but she noticed them whispering to each other when they thought no one was watching. Around midnight, just as she was preparing to hand over to the night shift, her supervisor burst through the staff door. His face was ash-white, and he was clutching his tablet like a life preserver. The receptionist had never seen him look so panicked, not even during last year's presidential visit. "Did you kick someone out earlier?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. When she nodded, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "A woman? In a brown jacket?" The receptionist's stomach turned to ice. She was disturbing the guests, she started to explain, but her supervisor cut her off by thrusting the tablet into her hands. On the screen was a corporate email marked urgent in bright red letters. Below that was a photograph of the woman from earlier, except now she was wearing a tailored business suit, her hair perfectly styled, standing at a podium during what appeared to be a press conference. The caption read, "Global Hospitality Group announces new CEO, industry pioneer takes helm." The receptionist's hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the tablet. She read further. Known for her hands-on approach to hotel management, the new CEO often conducts unannounced visits to assess true customer service standards. "She owns us now," her supervisor said, running his hands through his hair. "The whole chain. She bought us out last month, and she's been visiting all the properties incognito to see how they really operate. She's famous for it. Goes in looking like a regular person to see how staff treat everyday guests." The weight of what she had done crashed over the receptionist like a tidal wave. Her mind raced back through every moment of the interaction, the dismissive tone she used, the lies about being the senior staff member, the way she'd cut the woman off mid-sentence. Each memory felt like another nail in her career's coffin. "It gets worse," her supervisor continued, scrolling through his phone. "She's already posted about it." He turned the screen toward her. There, on the official company's social media account, was a thoughtful message about prejudice in the hospitality industry, accompanied by the security camera footage of the entire interaction. The post was going viral, with thousands of shares and comments pouring in by the minute. The receptionist sank into her chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The elegant lobby suddenly felt suffocating. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Other staff members, guests, even the potted plants seemed to be judging her. The crystal chandelier lights that usually felt so welcoming now seemed harsh and interrogating. "What happens now?" she whispered, though she was pretty sure she already knew. People got fired for much less than humiliating the CEO of their company. She'd be lucky if she ever worked in hospitality again. Her dream career, everything she'd worked for, all destroyed because she'd been too quick to judge, too confident in her assumptions. Her supervisor leaned against the desk, suddenly looking very tired. "She's called an emergency management meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. You're required to attend." He paused, then added more gently, "She specifically requested your presence." The night shift receptionist arrived just then, taking in the tense scene with raised eyebrows. As the receptionist gathered her things to leave, her hands still trembling, she couldn't help but remember the woman's final words. Remember this moment very clearly. Well, she certainly would. Every excruciating detail was now burned into her memory forever. Walking through the lobby toward the exit, she passed the spot where she'd confronted the CEO. The marble floor still gleamed perfectly, the piano still played softly, and the revolving door still spun, but everything felt different now. She'd learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving, and that lesson was about to cost her dearly. The next morning felt surreal. The receptionist barely slept, tossing and turning all night, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. Her usual morning routine of picking out the perfect outfit and doing her makeup felt pointless now. What did it matter how she looked when her career was about to end? She arrived at work an hour early, unable to bear sitting at home any longer. The morning shift workers avoided eye contact as she walked through the lobby. A few housekeepers who usually greeted her warmly suddenly found the floor very interesting as she passed. Word had spread fast, and she felt like a virus everyone was afraid to catch. The security footage had gone beyond viral overnight. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and former colleagues sharing links to news articles about the incident. "Luxury hotel worker kicks out own CEO," read one headline. "Undercover boss experiment goes wrong," declared another. Some comments defended her, saying she was just doing her job. Others called for her immediate firing. She turned off her phone, unable to take any more. The front desk, usually her favorite place in the world, felt like an enemy now. She remembered how proud she'd been of her position, how she used to admire her reflection in the polished marble, straightening her name tag with satisfaction. Now that same marble seemed to mock her, and her name tag felt like a badge of shame. Her coworkers whispered in corners, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever she came near. The morning staff meeting, usually full of friendly chatter and coffee, was eerily quiet. Her supervisor looked like he hadn't slept either, his tie slightly crooked, something she'd never seen before. The CEO's team just arrived, someone whispered, and everyone turned to look through the glass doors. A group of well-dressed executives walked into the lobby, their expensive shoes clicking against the floor. The woman from yesterday was among them, now wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than the receptionist's monthly salary. Her hair was elegantly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the powerful CEO she was. The contrast between this version of the woman and yesterday's appearance was startling. The receptionist felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. How could she have been so blind, so quick to judge? She'd always prided herself on being professional, but what did that word even mean if it meant treating some people better than others? The executives disappeared into the conference room, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. Hotel guests checked out, new ones checked in, but the receptionist barely noticed. She kept glancing at the conference room door, her heart jumping every time it opened. Each time, it was just another executive stepping out to take a phone call or grab some water. During her break, she couldn't face the staff room. Instead, she found herself in the back alley behind the hotel, sitting on an upturned milk crate next to the dumpsters. It was where the housekeepers usually took their smoke breaks, though none joined her today. The irony wasn't lost on her. Yesterday she would have considered this spot beneath her dignity. Now here she was, hiding among the garbage bins, wondering if she'd ever work in a hotel again. A kitchen worker came out to throw away some trash and did a double take when he saw her. "Hey," he said awkwardly, "I saw what happened. That could have been any of us, you know. We all make judgments sometimes." His kindness, the first she'd experienced since yesterday, almost broke her. She managed a weak smile but couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. Back at the front desk, the morning dragged on endlessly. Every time her phone rang, she expected it to be someone calling her to the conference room to receive her punishment. The wait was torture. Would they fire her publicly, make an example of her? Would they let her quietly resign to avoid more bad publicity? Or would they do something worse, demote her to cleaning rooms or working in the laundry, forcing her to face her prejudices every day? By lunchtime, the stress had given her a pounding headache, but she didn't dare take a proper break. She stood at her post, mechanically going through the motions of checking guests in and out, all while feeling like she was starring in her own personal horror movie. The crystal chandeliers that had once made her feel like she was part of something special now seemed to be watching her, waiting to see her fall. Just after lunch, the call finally came. "The CEO would like to see you now," her supervisor said quietly. The walk to the conference room felt like walking to her own execution. Her legs trembled with each step, and her palms were so sweaty she had to wipe them on her skirt several times. The conference room door looked more intimidating than ever. She'd been in this room hundreds of times for staff meetings, but now it felt like entering a lion's den. Taking one final deep breath, she knocked. "Come in," called a familiar voice, the same gentle voice from yesterday, though now it carried unmistakable authority. The CEO sat alone at the massive conference table, various papers spread out in front of her. The other executives were gone. She looked up and gestured to a chair across from her. "Please, sit down. Would you like some water?" The receptionist shook her head, then immediately wondered if refusing was another mistake. But the CEO didn't seem to notice, instead shuffling through some papers on the table. "I've been reading your employee file," she began, tapping a folder in front of her. 5 years of excellent service, multiple commendations for handling difficult situations, the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the region. She looked up. "That's quite impressive." The receptionist blinked in confusion. This wasn't how she expected the conversation to start. Where was the anger? The reprimand? The firing? She started, but her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I'm so sorry about yesterday. I made terrible assumptions, and I behaved unprofessionally. I understand if you want my resignation." The CEO leaned back in her chair, studying her with those same observant eyes from yesterday. "Tell me," she said, "why did you assume I couldn't be a guest at the hotel?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. The receptionist could have made excuses about hotel policy or security concerns, but sitting here now, she knew she had to be honest. "Because of how you looked," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your clothes, your hair, I just assumed." "That I couldn't afford it," the CEO finished. "That I didn't belong." "Yes," the receptionist whispered, shame burning her cheeks. "I was wrong." "So wrong?" The CEO nodded slowly. "You know, when I started in this industry 30 years ago, I was a housekeeper. I worked my way up from cleaning rooms to running an entire hotel chain. And along the way, I learned something important. Luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about making everyone feel special." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Yesterday, when you turned me away, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. Not just in you, but in myself. Because if one of our best employees could make this mistake, it means I'd failed to create the right culture in our hotels." Turning back to face the receptionist, she continued, "That's why I'm not going to fire you." The receptionist's head snapped up in shock. "You're not?" "No," the CEO said firmly. "Instead, I have a different proposition for you." She returned to her seat and pulled out another folder. "I'm forming a new team to completely overhaul our customer service training program. We need someone who understands both excellence in service and," she paused meaningfully, "the consequences of prejudice." The receptionist sat there stunned. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. Was this really happening? Was she being offered a promotion instead of a termination? The position would require you to travel to all our properties, sharing your story and helping create new training materials, the CEO continued. It won't be easy. You'll have to tell this story over and over, admit your mistakes publicly, and face tough questions. But I believe your experience could help prevent others from making the same mistake. Tears welled up in the receptionist's eyes, not tears of shame this time, but of gratitude and disbelief. Why? She managed to ask. Why would you trust me with this after what I did? The CEO smiled. A real warm smile that transformed her whole face. Because sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest contributions. The question is, are you willing to learn from this and help others learn too? The next few weeks were unlike anything the receptionist had ever experienced. The CEO's offer had come with one condition. Before starting the new role, she needed to understand hospitality from every angle. That meant working alongside the very people she had once looked down upon. Her first day began at 5 a.m. with the breakfast crew. She learned how to brew industrial-sized batches of coffee and set up the breakfast buffet before dawn. Her feet ached from standing in the kitchen for hours, but she gained a new respect for the staff who did this every day with a smile. Next came housekeeping. The supervisor, an older woman who'd been with the hotel for 20 years, showed no mercy. You want to learn? She said, handing over a cleaning cart. Then you'll do everything we do. The receptionist's perfectly manicured nails quickly chipped as she scrubbed bathrooms and changed sheets. By day's end, her back screamed from bending over beds, and her hands were raw from cleaning products. The laundry room taught her another lesson in humility. The heat was stifling, the work endless. Mountains of sheets and towels needed washing, drying, folding, and delivering, all while maintaining the hotel's high standards. The staff there worked like a well-oiled machine, their efficiency born from years of experience. They barely spoke English, but their teamwork spoke volumes. In the maintenance department, she shadowed a worker who'd been fixing things at the hotel longer than she'd been alive. He showed her the maze of pipes and wires hidden behind the elegant walls, the complex systems that kept everything running smoothly. Every job matters, he told her while fixing a leaky faucet. Without us, there is no luxury. The kitchen was perhaps the biggest eye-opener. She'd always hurried past it, avoiding the noise and heat. Now she found herself in the middle of it, watching the dance of chefs and dishwashers working in perfect harmony. The head chef, seeing her struggling to keep up, pulled her aside. You know why we work so hard? He asked. Because when a guest enjoys their meal, it doesn't matter if we're in a fancy restaurant or a street food stall, we've made someone happy. Between shifts, the CEO had her attend diversity training sessions, but not as a participant, as an example. Standing in front of rooms full of hotel staff from across the chain, she had to tell her story. The first time was terrifying. Her voice shook as she described her mistake, her judgment, her shame. But something unexpected happened. People didn't judge her. They shared their own stories of times they'd been prejudged or had prejudged others. One evening, after a particularly emotional training session, she found herself sitting in the staff cafeteria with a group of housekeepers. They were sharing their lunch, homemade food that smelled amazing. One of them, noticing her looking at their food, offered her a portion. The simple act of kindness brought tears to her eyes. You know, said one of the older housekeepers, when you first started this training, we thought it was just for show. But you're really trying to learn, aren't you? The receptionist nodded, too moved to speak. She thought about how she used to be alone at her desk, thinking she was somehow above sharing a meal in the staff room. Now she understood that she'd been the one missing out, not just on good food, but on genuine human connection. As weeks passed, she began to see the hotel differently. The elegant lobby was no longer just a showcase of luxury. It was the result of countless people's hard work and dedication. Every spotless surface, every fresh flower, every warm smile had a story behind it. The crystal chandeliers that once symbolized status now reminded her of the maintenance worker who carefully cleaned each crystal by hand. 1 month into her training, the CEO called her back to the conference room. This time, the receptionist walked in with confidence born not from pride, but from understanding. Her hands were no longer perfectly manicured, and her feet hurt from a long day of training, but she felt more professional than ever before. "Well," said the CEO, "what have you learned?" The receptionist looked down at her calloused hands, then back up with a smile. "I've learned that true hospitality isn't about judging who belongs and who doesn't. It's about making everyone feel like they belong." 6 months later, the same receptionist stood in front of a packed conference room at the company's annual leadership meeting. Her hands no longer shook when she told her story. Instead, she spoke with the confidence of someone who had learned from their mistakes and grown stronger because of them. "I used to think I knew what luxury meant," she told the audience. "I thought it was about expensive clothes, perfect manners, and keeping certain people out. I was wrong. True luxury is about making everyone feel special, regardless of how they look or what they wear." The training program she helped develop had already transformed the way their hotels operated. Every new employee now spent time working in different departments before starting their main role. Front desk staff cleaned rooms alongside housekeepers. Managers helped in the kitchen during busy times. Everyone learned to see beyond appearances. But the biggest change had happened within the hotels themselves. The formerly rigid atmosphere had softened. Guests commented on how warm and welcoming the staff had become. Reviews mentioned not just the beautiful buildings and fancy amenities, but the genuine care they felt from every employee. One day, while visiting another hotel in the chain to conduct training, she witnessed something that brought tears to her eyes. A shabby-looking man walked into the lobby, clutching a worn backpack. The young receptionist behind the desk stepped forward, but instead of asking him to leave, she smiled warmly and asked, "How can I make your stay special today, sir?" The man turned out to be a famous travel writer working on a story about hotel hospitality. Later that week, he published an article praising the hotel's inclusive approach to luxury service. The story went viral, bringing positive attention to the entire chain. During a coffee break between training sessions, the CEO surprised her with a visit. They sat in the hotel's staff room, the same room the receptionist had once avoided like the plague. Now it felt more comfortable than the fancy lobby. "Do you remember what I told you 6 months ago?" the CEO asked, stirring her coffee with a plastic spoon. "About how our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest contributions." The receptionist nodded, thinking about how far she'd come. Yesterday, she'd had lunch with the housekeeping staff, sharing stories and laughs over homemade food. Last week, she'd helped the maintenance team fix a broken ice machine, getting her suit dirty in the process. These days, she felt more pride in those moments than she ever had in her previous perfect appearance. "Well," the CEO continued, "I want you to become our new director of guest experience training. Your story has become a powerful tool for change. But more importantly, you've shown that change is possible when we're willing to learn from our mistakes." The receptionist looked around the staff room at the mix of employees taking their breaks. Housekeepers, chefs, maintenance workers, front desk staff, all sharing the same space, all equally valuable to the hotel's success. "I'd be honored," she said, "but I have one condition." The CEO raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh." "I want to keep working shifts in different departments just a few times each month, to stay grounded, to remember what I learned." The CEO smiled and extended her hand. "Deal." That evening, as the receptionist walked through the lobby one last time before her promotion took effect, she stopped at the exact spot where she confronted the CEO months ago. The marble floor still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but she saw them differently now. They weren't symbols of exclusivity anymore. They were reminders of the hard-working people who polished that marble and cleaned those crystals every day. A woman walked through the revolving door, looking tired and disheveled from travel. 6 months ago, the receptionist might have judged her, might have made assumptions. Instead, she smiled and walked over to help with the heavy luggage. "Welcome," she said, putting all the warmth she'd learned into that one word. "How can we make your stay special today?" Because now she understood, true hospitality wasn't about keeping people out. It was about welcoming everyone in.